Welcome to the Valley of Outlaws podcast with me, Will Flindle. A podcast for those taking the road less trodden, and a podcast for those seeking more. On today's episode, I'm joined by Toby Moynan, a voiceover artist who's building his reputation and following a path of expression that is instinctive to him and gives him fulfillment. What's so interesting about this conversation is initially understanding why voiceover work connects so deeply with him, understanding where the passion comes from and what the passion is and how he gets his mind into the right place to be able to deliver spoken word in a way that engages and encourages the listeners to buy a product or believe in a movement more than they would do so before. So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome. So you are Outlaw number 10. We are in double figures.
Awesome.
What an honour.
What an honour.
Ever been called an outlaw before?
No, and I love it.
It's a good title, isn't it?
Really
It's
great.
quite nice.
I'll put it on my LinkedIn. It's great.
Brilliant. So one of the reasons I wanted to get you on to today really was because of the current position you are in with kind of following your passion and balancing that between a 9-to-5 job and transitioning and figuring out when to take the right step to go full into it, and is it the right step to go into that area. And I think there's a lot of value in this space because a lot of people are considering it, they're trying to do it, and not many people have the courage to take that risk to quit that job and to go fully into it. So understanding your thinking at the moment and also why this passion is enough of a thing to take a risk on is super interesting. But before we go deep into that, my first question is always, in your own words, who are you, what do you do, and why do you do what you do?
So I am Toby Moynan, or Tobias, and I am a 29-year-old voiceover artist based in London, and I do it because I really like it, I suppose. I would say love it, but I think that sounds a bit cringe, but that is true. I think I've always had a desire to perform in some way.
Okay.
So it scratches that itch, I think. Yeah, that's why I do it.
Is it a performance voiceover?
Yeah, definitely. There's a good phrase about voiceover, which is that it's like if you have a pen, anyone has a pen, but can you use it? And so it's all about lifting the words off the page. And a lot of the mediums you do it on, so like radio, or like even if you're just a voiceover for a video, you need to describe things more than you ordinarily would. Like if it's someone talking in a movie, you're seeing what they're doing. But like for radio in particular, it has to be very visual because you have to like conjure the thoughts in the listener's mind. So yeah, definitely a performance. Yeah.
And how long, like what kind of training in your way of thinking do you have to get into actually understanding the words on paper you're reading and trying to control that narrative and the way people see it? Or do you kind of let people see what they want to see with it?
I mean, I have the fortune of working in advertising.
Yeah.
And before I even started this venture into voiceover, so I could learn almost off other voiceover artists how they interpret a script. But I've always liked drama and acting. So I think I've sort of honed an ability to decipher a script and what kind of emotions I should be like showing. But I think you get a script, you read it, and you sort of pick out the emotional bits. And it varies. A lot of stuff is really boring. Like I do quite a lot of corporate stuff, and I won't name names, but because I won't get any more work. But like really mundane sort of finance or insurance stuff, and that's challenging to bring emotion to something that is inherently dull. And you often get feedback from the clients that say, like, oh, can you make it a bit more human and conversational? Those two words come up the whole time. And it's difficult because it's not a very human thing to talk about. And you often get things like, I've had this many times. Can you do it like you're sort of, chatting to your mate down at the pub? I'm like, I wouldn't chat to my mate about maritime insurance at the pub. And I didn't, you've got to interpret that. And often the client doesn't really necessarily know what they want. And they'll say human and conversational, but they don't know what that is.
Yes.
If I was talking to my mate down at the pub, I've got quite a sort of monotone voice. So it'd be like, you don't want that on an advert. I kind of interpret it. I come up with my own interpretation of it. Usually I get some direction from them, but then I might have a sort of better idea of how it could sound.
Yeah.
And then I say, what do you think about this? And sometimes they're like, yeah, that's rubbish. Or they're like, no, that's great. So kind of start there.
No, interesting. And how did you, so you said through advertising you got exposed to it. Was that kind of your first like, oh, I could do this as a career, like a little light bulb moment? Or was there elements before watching TV and hearing voiceovers where you had that kind of connection to it?
Yeah, I mean, I never really, it's not something that I thought about when I was younger. And I thought, wow, cool, I really want to be a voiceover artist. I think the moment was, so my first proper job after university was on Compare the Market, so the Meerkats. Yeah. And it was great. As a first job in advertising, working on that is epic. And the best part of my job was going to the sound studio and watching this guy, Simon Greenall, doing the Meerkat voices. And he does both of the voices, so Sergey and Alex. Do you know them?
I know them, don't you worry.
And they've got very different voices.
Yeah.
So Alexander is a bit more, oh yeah, Sergey, that's rubbish. I mean, I butchered that. And then Sergey is more like, oh, Mr. Alexander. And Simon Greenall you'd give him a 30-second radio script, and it's a conversation between those two meerkats, and he'd read it in a oneer. So like real-time conversation, rather than what most people would do is you do one line and then the other.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just a nice experience because you go and sit in these comfy studios in Soho and get your free lunch and stuff. And you witness this brilliant and talented guy. He was also very, very likable. He would, he'd like to sort of play the jester and chat with us, which is always nice because sometimes you get voiceover artists who are a bit precious. Not me though.
Thank God.
And I think that maybe that was the eureka moment.
Okay. I
was like, that is so cool, and I want to do that, and I think I might be able to do it. So that kind of planted the seed. Yeah. But I think it was a long time before that seed started growing. Yeah,
because it seems like it's a not an element of power, but of element of influence as well. You're using a tool, your voice, to influence and control and capture the attention of people. Yeah. And it's such an interesting kind of thing. Like you said before, when you talk to friends at the pub, it's quite monotone. I've always been accused of being monotone, and I probably am always in these podcasts, but like...
That's fine. That's your voice, though.
No, exactly.
I was told once when I was doing a training course on how to present ideas persuasively.
Yes.
So as you can imagine, it was riveting. I was told by the lady taking the course. She said, "You're going to really struggle, Toby, because you've got a very monosyllabic voice. Like you're going to lose people's attention." And look at me now. I'm a voiceover artist, so screw you.
No,
but like, I think that, people have a monotone voice. That's the great thing about it. Like, people have deep voices. People have like high-pitched voices. People have energetic voices naturally, and there's a great variety. So you pick the one that is going to is right for your script. What's annoying is when people pick someone like with my voice, and they're like, "I want a really energetic and friendly script." And I'm like, that's not me. I'm not energetic and friendly.
Well, that's the thing, though. I find also, depending on the topic you're talking about. So for me, when I'm talking about something I love, passionate about, let's say football, or let's say podcasting, or let's say just having a conversation about life, I find I'm probably far less monosyllabic. I've got a kind of intuition between the words and that kind of like ability to flex on certain things and emphasize certain points because I actually really understand intuitively what I'm trying to say and how I'm trying to influence that. And it's quite an interesting thing. It's almost like you don't know about it until you're in that moment of like that kind of...
And it's an interesting point. They say with that classic feedback of be more human and conversational and natural. Funnily enough, I Googled how to be more natural because I got the feedback on a recent project, and it's like you start racking your brains because you try and add like a bit more intonation. You're like, oh yeah, blah, 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 up and down. But then the more you think about it, the more you're overdoing it, and you're going the opposite direction. So I watched a video about how to be like tips for like practicing and what you do, and it's all about like the imperfections. So you don't read it like almost like a sort of song where it's sort of consistent. You know, there are breaks between words, and you don't necessarily pronounce, like, you might not say can't, that you might not hear the T, and that's natural. But it's a difficult one to do. They say what you should do, which is a very weird thing, is you should put your phone on record and then like just go about your day or whatever, or have a conversation with your mate, and then listen back to see what your like intonation is like, and try and replicate that.
Wow. How long have you observed your own voice then?
How long have I observed it?
Yeah, in terms of this kind of thing of recording yourself.
I haven't done that.
Okay, well, how long have you been aware then of the way you talk and try to like understand it, and then understand your strengths and weaknesses? Because obviously you said earlier, you know, a happy kind of like energetic's not your thing.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So when I started like this passion, I was trying to figure out what kind of scripts I could do. And you don't necessarily think when you're starting out, I might be appropriate for some things and not other things. You come to learn that. And one of the first things I did was Wallen, who you know, a good friend of mine. He had all the equipment. I didn't have any equipment yet, but he's very talented with all things sort of sound and music. So I went to his house just to like record some scripts that I'd heard on the radio, just listen to like radio on catch up and write down in the advert breaks the scripts that I liked. Basically just to see, can I do this? Am I any good at it? And I remember thinking clearly then, so I think I did a McDonald's ad, and then like a Kia Niro ad, and then I realised, listening back, I was like, no one's going to want to listen to me doing a McDonald's ad. I'm probably not the best person to resonate with the man in a van at 10 a.m. He'll be like, who is this posh so-and-so? And that was interesting. And it's annoying because you kind of want to do it all. You're like, I want to do it all. But you have to find your niche, because if you do things like that, people will be like, well, that's not appropriate. And then they'll remember that you were the guy who thought he could do a McDonald's ad and massively misjudged it. But then you find like maybe what I found recently is my voice, people seem to like it for like narration sort of stuff, and wellness things. So I did some affirmation work recently, like a sort of a sleep session, which is quite an odd thing to do, to just sit in your booth for like hours on end saying things like, you are a calm person. But people seem to like it, and I quite like doing that style. I also have learned that the epic sort of style, like absolute 80s, that kind of Matt Berry-esque sort of thing, that I can do that quite well. So you do start finding your niche, and it's important to find your niche, but you learn that over time. You have to like just do it for a couple of years and then just look back, and you can't just sort of sit down and try and figure it out. You have to try and fail, basically. Yeah, exactly.
And that's the failure, the growth from that is super important. I guess that's so interesting. And did you ever at one point think, I could be the next David Attenborough? Like,
Someone said that to me once.
Really?
It was a wellness app, an American client. And they found I get jobs through various different sites and word of mouth. This particular one, you have your reels up, and like a potential client will search for a style of voice, and then they'll pick you out, and then they'll hire you. You don't have to audition for it. And this was an app, which I won't say because probably can't for legal reasons. That was same sort of thing. It was affirmations and manifesting, I think is what they call it. An American app, because apparently Americans quite like listening to British people, because we are generally better.
Yeah, of course. The homeland.
And I remember she said, it's so great to have the next David Attenborough here on I was like, whoa, all right. And I was relatively new at this point as well. I was like, please, just relax. And I actually, my voice never ended up getting used for that.
Oh, really?
Which I never knew why.
So did you not get any feedback for anything if you put stuff in? Is it?
It was very strange. So you have a live session on this particular one. It's not always a live session. Sometimes they just send you a script and you send it back. But it's always best to do a live session because then you can just like corner them on like what is it you want, and then they can say yeah, that's it. And also it means afterwards they can't really amend it. They can't say well, it's not quite right. It's like well, you were there.
Yeah.
And on this one, it was a lot of you are a calm person, you are a happy person. It was like about 3 hours worth of that. So I said, why don't we do like an hour's worth, and then I'll go away and just do it in that style once we're happy. So I did it, and then I was like, how was that? We had to sort of fine tune a couple of things because some of it was quite weird wording about. Yeah. Started going into like energies and center of the universe stuff, and I was struggling to find the right tone for that because I didn't necessarily believe it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but we got to a point where we were happy, and you get a solid answer from them. Are you happy with that? I'll go and do the rest. And did the rest, and then didn't hear anything for a week or so, and then I got an email back saying from the producer saying, "Hey Toby, they've just emailed to say that the recordings aren't quite what they expected." And I was like, well, okay. And it's gutting when you get like feedback. When you just get bad feedback, it really hurts. Especially when you're new and you don't have like the confidence of loads of other jobs. Yeah. And you start thinking, oh, maybe I'm crap at this. And that's all the feedback they gave. So I was kind of scratching my head like, what have I done wrong? Like I literally got her to say yes, that's exactly it, and she was chuffed to bits. So we organised like a re-record session. That never happened, and I'd never heard from them again. But I got paid, so that's fine.
That's quite interesting.
Not that it's about money.
No. That's interesting in terms of like these early failures as well, because I've asked quite a few guests about this in terms of when you are starting out, those first hurdles are sometimes the biggest ones to swallow. They're the biggest pills to take. They're the ones where you go, am I right for this?
Yeah.
So what is your kind of mindset in a situation where you're doing different kind of, I guess it's trials and kind of auditions for people, and they go, not for this, not for this. How do you kind of react in terms of with your mind to go, I need to still carry on. I still got a space and a position in this space.
It gets easier. It was difficult at the beginning. I think that's probably like one of the biggest hurdles you've got to overcome. Particularly with voiceover, it can be very up and down. You might get a job and then you feel great, you feel validated, and then you don't get anything for another couple of months, and then you start doubting. You always, I think that the doubt, it always creeps in, and I'm pretty sure it always will. But once you have a load of jobs that you've done well under your belt, you can sort of go back to that, and you feel a bit rubbish, but then you're like, well, I did this, so I can do it. So you've got to, I think you've just got to accept that you're not always going to win. It's a subjective thing as well. Maybe I tell myself that they're wrong. If they're like, no, it's not quite right, I just in my head I go, well, they're wrong.
Okay.
Even though they're probably right. But that, I think you just got to say it wasn't the right job. I'm not the right voiceover for that particular script, but I can do other scripts. It just happens, and you get better because of it.
And is it one of those careers, because obviously a lot of people, if they say like an artist, for example, they paint, they want to get a painting into a competition or a gallery. Oh, no, but they're still going to carry on painting and do stuff anyway. Like, do you do a lot of kind of voiceover practice and kind of like, is it reels they're called, or?
Yes.
Reels on your own just to like actually keep going? Is it something you have to keep doing more and more and more to build up the confidence and the skill set?
Yeah. I mean, you really need to practice. And I'm a very impatient person, and that's another thing I struggled with, because I mean, anyone just kind of wants success immediately. And it's something that I realized relatively recently. I'd say in the last year, I started noticing that I was booking more jobs, and just getting good feedback, and it all started like flooding in. And I think it's because just sheer practice.
Like confidence in actually the way you're going to deliver it as well.
Yeah.
It's huge.
And there's no sort of moment, like a green light moment where you get your voiceover certificate and you're like qualified. But there comes a point where, like, like in my experience, you start getting jobs and you think, oh, it's probably because I've just literally been ploughing on for 4 or 5 years, just doing it, and you just naturally become better.
So can we talk about that? So in terms of this starting into that, all the stuff people don't see, what are the early kind of things you were doing, and how are you thinking in that kind of position to really get yourself into the state you are now?
What is in like, how I sort of came to start in
Well, in some ways that, but also what's kind of like your plan you've got when you're starting this thing, I can do something. What's your kind of initial plan of action to go, right, I know I need to get in front of people, I need to do auditions, but obviously you need to perfect your art and your craft as well.
It's an unconventional career because there's no grad scheme for voiceover. So once you make your mind up, you're then like, okay, cool, I know I want to do voiceover. How the hell do I do it? You can't apply to a company. Well, I mean, you can, but I wouldn't do that. You have to, there's no sort of defined way. I'd say you kind of have to just sort of start fumbling around in the dark a bit. There's a lot of varying opinions as well. I guess naturally at this, when you decide on a new venture, one of the things you start doing is you Google how to be a voiceover artist. And there's a lot of differing opinions out there. A lot of like sort of old school voiceover artists will say, well, you can't do it unless you're a trained actor, or you need 3 years of coaching, and like I wouldn't like reach out to agents or apply for jobs until you've got that training. And there is an element of truth in it, but I mean I think some people might disagree with this. I think you've just got to go for it. Unless you're crap, don't. But if you're confident enough in yourself and you've heard from enough people that they think you're good enough, not your parents, other people who you can sort of trust, then I think you just need to start going for it and be careful about it. So I've gone about it in quite a slow and considered way, I'd say. Applying for smaller jobs that, won't, if I do them badly, no one's going to know. It's not going to burn any bridges. So you just, start like easing in. And then slowly you start picking up and you get better and better. But ultimately, at some point, you've just got to start doing it and stop thinking about like training and stuff like that, because you kind of train as you go. And that's the most valuable training you can do, is by doing a job and getting actual feedback from a client. So yeah, I think my advice to people doing the same sort of thing is at some point get started. You have to do a little bit of like just figuring out the industry. You should know certain things, like you don't breathe into the microphone because that no one wants to hear that. You need a pop filter because no one wants to hear plosives. And just like general like how you behave with a microphone, like technique. And also you need to have a good idea of how to lift words off a piece of paper. You can't just because you have a nice voice, you can't do voiceover. A lot of people think that is the case, but it's not. It goes back to that saying I mentioned. You can have a pen, but you can be terrible at writing.
Can we talk about that a bit more? Actually, that's super interesting in terms of like the way you actually connect with the words. Like when you're doing it, are you in a flow state in terms of the way you are acting and delivering? Like, is it something where you're not really overthinking it? It's just naturally flowing.
I usually try a few different ways of doing it. It obviously depends entirely on the nature of the scripts, like these wellness meditation things that I've been doing recently. It's very, very quiet and close to the microphone, and you have to get in that. You have to get in the zone. I actually bought some incense to try and get myself in the zone for it. Didn't really work, but it was a nice idea.
That's too good.
But I usually do like 3 different versions. In fact, it's something I did recently for some sort of tech startup, and they said, "Can you send us a sample of the script?" And I asked them what any sort of vocal direction they have in mind, and it was quite bizarre. It was subtle was a word they used. I was like, what? I mean, what do you mean by that? Subtle, friendly, brackets not overly salesy. I was like, okay, cool, right. What do I make of that? So I did 3 versions. One was kind of closer to how I speak.
Yeah.
A bit like monosyllabic, which is fine. Laid back, I'd say, which I think can be quite good, because it instills confidence in a way, because you can tell by the way they're reading that they're almost quietly confident about it. You're not being pushy. And then I do the classic, like, get the new blah blah card, which is your sort of like classic. That's the
Car
sort of
salesman. Yeah.
Which is quite fun to do, but it's a bit outdated. And then so I send them like the options, and they go, "Oh, cool, yeah, more like that." But getting in the zone for a script is quite, especially when you have a day job, can be quite difficult. If you've just finished work and you're like, right, I've got to do this space documentary or whatever, you have to sort of decompress a bit. You really need to read through the script before you don't just go in cold and start. What I do is I read through it and I highlight words. Usually if the product's in there, highlight that, because they'll want you to say that very clearly and louder than everything else. Sometimes I just sort of draw a little like line if I want to do like an inflection up at the end.
Okay.
Or sometimes an inflection down. Because like an inflection down can be, I mean, it's so like granular, but it can be slightly unexpected. I think usually people fall into a rhythm of like going up at the end of the sentence. If you go down, again, it's that sort of quietly confident.
Can you give an example of those two? I'd be really interested to hear that.
Okay, get the new kinetic card would be obviously up. That's your classic salesman. But I'll try and do it live. Mm-hmm. Get the new kinetic card. That sounded a bit sexy.
No, I can see it. I can see the
Magnum
difference.
advert.
I can see the difference though, in terms of it's like it's more of an intensity in that kind of sense, isn't it?
But like people might have a different point of view.
Yeah.
I personally prefer. I don't mind my own voice.
Yeah.
Even though when you start, you hate it.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you: is what is it like doing a passion and career path where you are judged on your voice? Like, imagine there's a huge amount of self-conscious thinking and limiting beliefs that you would have around that, because you're judged on just one element of you.
Yeah.
And that is it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You open yourself up for a lot of hurt.
Yeah.
If people don't like it, because that is you.
Yeah.
It's your very being.
Mm-hmm.
What I noticed at the beginning is like anyone, people will say when you hear your voice that you just don't like it because it doesn't sound like it does when you're hearing it through your ears and out your mouth. Mm-hmm. But you get over that quite quickly when you do voiceover. When you do enough and you listen back enough, that goes away, which is nice. But yeah, you have to find your voice again. So you have to think about, going back to what I was saying earlier, like what are you appropriate for? And then you have to have confidence in your voice. You need to find it, because you can do variations. You can do endless variations. There's an interesting thing where there's like techniques where you can, if you put your finger on your belly, you start speaking a bit more from inside.
Interesting.
If you're like crouched a bit, you're speaking more from your throat.
Okay.
So that might be more appropriate for something like if you're doing like a conversational script, you would speak like I'm speaking to you from the throat. If you want something with a bit more gravitas, you might sort of sit up and put your finger in your belly.
Is that what you do?
Yeah, the new Kia Niro. So yeah, it just depends what people want. But yeah, you're very vulnerable because it's your voice. And when people say they don't like something, it can hurt.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And do you ever do any? I mean, you do it all at home. You said in your booth, but
yeah.
Like, have you ever done anything in front of people like where you felt a judgment from them, and it's like, shit?
Yeah. Yes, I have. I do. I mean, quite a lot of the sessions I do are live. But in my room, in my booth, on a Zoom link. I remember one recently where I really want to say the name, but again, I probably shouldn't. It was for a milk brand.
Okay.
an alternative milk brand, so not cow milk. And the style of the voiceover was the classic epic kind of one. And at the beginning of the session, as I always do, I said, right, I'll read a couple of lines and then you tell me what you think and we can sort of dial up, dial down, whatever you want. So I did it in the epic Matt Berry voice. Probably not that enthusiastic, but I did it. And then I said, how was that? And the guy was like, yeah, it's probably about a 6 out of 10 for me. And I was like, oh shit, that hurts.
Yeah.
That really hit me in the heart. And you have to, I guess you have to roll with the punches.
Well, that is a thing. It's a thing with anything where you're following your passions. It's like you have to be prepared to be hit in the face.
Yeah.
And
you
take
have
it.
to, every now and again, you have to eat shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's good. I mean, that's just, you can't shy away from it because you will never get better. In an ideal world, you'd do these voiceovers in your own time, not on a live link, and you just live a very solitude-like life, like a hermit. But you're never going to get real feedback, and you're not going to grow. So it's, even though I think he could have said it in a slightly more constructive way, it was good because I then dialed it up a lot, and it sounded more epic.
Cool.
But yeah, it hurt.
And so, as I said at the start, I want to get on this idea of, you're following this passion while working full time. How do you find that balance as well? Because obviously, I struggled with it when I was working for an architect. I only worked 3 days a week, but I started doing my wallpaper company on the side, and I just had no interest in the other work I was doing. It's like, I'll do the bare minimum I need to do. I'll do it, I'll get home, and I'll have time to do what I want to do. So you can't do that. You can't sustainably not put effort into both.
Yeah.
And how did you kind of find that balance where you're still finding the enjoyment in everything else you're doing and then having the energy to bring back in the evenings?
It can be tough because you don't. My day job is advertising, and sometimes that can be very long hours.
Yeah.
It's very up and down. And if you've just done a really long stint and then you're thinking, crap, I've got to do that script when I get back, it's very difficult to then muster the energy again. Sometimes it just works out. I work weekends quite a lot now, and it was something that I didn't really want to do at the beginning, but I've come to not mind it because also I really like voiceover. It's not, I don't see it as a job that I have to do to feed myself, and it's like a separate thing. It's kind of tied to my personal life. So I enjoy it. Like tomorrow I'm going to do this space documentary about how big is the universe.
Oh, cool.
And it's quite interesting stuff, and I don't mind that. It's quite fun sitting in your booth. But because you have a day job, you have to find extra time to do it, and it can be a struggle. So managing your time is very important. It's something that I struggle with sometimes because you might not necessarily know how many jobs you're about to get, and then suddenly you have. I mean, I've done 2 of these space documentaries. When I got the message from the guy who asked for them, there were 2 at the same time. One was 9,000 words, one was about 10,000 words, and that takes a really long time to record. And I hadn't done a documentary before or any script that long. So when I was going back to this guy with timings, I was kind of just making it up. And I probably should have allowed for more time. I mean, I did it in the time allocated, but I mean, that's just the way it goes. You learn from your previous mistakes. And you learn you need to allow more time for you personally. Because also what I've learned you should do is you should, like, a 9,000 word script, you should break that up and not necessarily do it all in one day, because you start losing interest, and you'll notice on part 2 about does time exist, you can hear yourself back and you can hear that you've lost interest in it. So you need to spread it out for your sanity. And actually last night, for example, I was like, oh great, free evening, I'll do some voiceover. And then I thought, actually, you know what, I won't, because I was just tired. And I think you need to look after yourself and remember that, just to stop and check, and like ensure that you you're enjoying your sort of your leisure time with your mates.
Yeah.
Because then that maintains your interest in whatever hustle you're doing.
Having that space to kind of think and just live a little bit in the moment.
Yeah, you need to decompress.
Yeah, yeah. And how long do you find? Like, I find being in the creative world, like if I do kind of branding stuff, like I always like to say I need thinking time before doing time. Like, how long do you need to get mentally into a script or a character? And does that, again, do you struggle with that, with the kind of balance of work? Like, you're obviously thinking in a day, right, I've got this tonight, but you can't just switch on and off. Like, it's like you need to slowly build up to that.
Yeah, it's very difficult to switch between the two, because as I'm sure you'll know, like whatever your head's in, like your blinkers will go on and you're in that zone.
Yeah.
And then you do it, you finish it, and then you have to come out of it, and you're kind of reluctant to come out of it and go to the other thing, just because it's just a bit of an effort. You're like, oh, but I'm in that zone now.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to sort of put those two different heads on. But yeah, like getting in the zone for a script, I mean, it just depends. Like when it comes through, sometimes I'll just get it through on my phone and I'll look at it, and some scripts are easier than others. You might get like a sort of 10-second jingle.
Okay.
Like I did a DHL one the other day, which was not the other day, a couple of months ago, but that ran in the Middle East actually. Not here though. That's fine. And that was just like the ending of a radio ad. And that's easy. You look at it, and also what's nice is sometimes you see a script and you think, that is like, I'm a good fit for that. I know exactly how I'm going to do that. So you'll see that and you're like, brilliant, I can do that very easily. But then you might get a more complicated one or a very dry script, and you're like, oh, I'm going to really have to think about that one and go through and highlight the words and like rehearse almost like how I'm going to do it. Sometimes, I mean, hands up, sometimes I just don't have the time. So I just go into it a little bit cold and I just go straight in and record it because I just don't have the option of, or the luxury of thinking through it.
That's interesting. So at that point now, where's the balance in terms of you going, right, I need to find more time to do it, and how are you thinking about that now? Because I know you're gradually looking to kind of consider switching more towards the voiceover. Like, what's your thinking like at the moment with this, where you go, right, maybe, you know, I need to allocate more time to be able to get myself present with the voiceover stuff.
When am I going to make the leap?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Basically, yeah. And what's the kind of, I guess, the thoughts in that process, because it's more of a risk, but you're committing to that.
It's I think only very recently has that possibility become quite real, which is exciting and slightly daunting at the same time, because we live very structured lives. You go to school, you go to university, you get a 9-to-5 job. Whether you are earning enough from your side hustle or not, it's weird to think that I might not have that security of a 9-to-5 job. So, I mean, my approach is I really like my day job in advertising, and actually it works quite well because you have the mixture of the two, and it's good for sanity reasons. Sure, sometimes there's a load of work in both of your jobs, and it sucks. But overall, I find it's good for my sanity. Also, if I was just doing voiceover, probably wouldn't have that much interaction with other humans, so I might go a bit insane. So it works well for now. But my approach to that is, I'm going to see how the next few months go, and if I can maintain the level of income I'm getting at the moment consistently over a period of time, and if I can, I think then I might have to I might have to do it.
I think you might have to.
Yeah.
What's super interesting is saying about, you know, the confines society sets about, you go to school, you go to university, you get a 9-to-5 job, you get a mortgage, you buy a house, you get married, you have kids, How much have you felt you've been aligned to that or fighting against that in this area?
I think I fight against that sort of thing. It's interesting. I think the period of time after university, like first coming to London, I think there's a lot of, I'm going to use some cringe phrases now, like sort of soul searching and like self-discovery. Yeah, I said it.
Perfectly acceptable here. Don't you worry.
But yeah, I think, so yeah, up until then, you're at an institution, very structured. and it's not the real world. And then suddenly you're in the real world, and then you start figuring out, right, who am I, and like who do I want to be? Like, what kind of route do I want to go down? And I think can be. I mean, it's different for everyone, but I think for me it was a little bit daunting. I think I didn't really know like what direction I wanted to go in. And then over the years, you stop asking your questions, your sort of identity crisis questions, and you become more sure of yourself. But I think I definitely try and go down the path less trodden. I don't think, many people probably wouldn't choose this route of voiceover because it's very undefined.
How influential were your parents in terms of doing this? Like, I asked a question which is, were you raised to think outside the box in terms of life, living, career, that kind of stuff?
It's a difficult. It's nature versus nurture, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, my parents have definitely had a big influence on who I am today, for sure. Exactly how is more difficult to pin down. But I think we had to be, me and my siblings had to be quite independent from a young age because we lived abroad. So we had to navigate Heathrow to Saudi Arabia on our own when we were about sort of 8 or 9 years old. So I definitely think that's shaped who I am a bit. I think because of that, you have to be independent, and I think that inspires independence of thought a bit. I also think that my parents and I think school has definitely instilled confidence in me. Hopefully not arrogance, confidence. And I think when you have confidence, you then trust your own thinking a bit more. So you're more willing to think outside the box because you're like, actually, I sometimes make good decisions.
There's evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably shaped my thinking a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do they kind of say now in terms of you saying, I'm considering going fully into this? Is there like a give it a go, try it, see what happens? Like, you got nothing to lose.
Yeah. I mean, they're very excited about it. They love it. I mean, it's strange to think that there was a point in my life where I was considering joining the army.
Really?
Well, I thought that for a long time, so my dad was in the army,
yeah,
and so was my brother. And that's like the world when you're growing up, and you think that's just what I'm going to do because that's just the way it goes. So it's quite nice the fact you find something completely different. I mean, if you'd have told a younger version of Toby you'd be a voiceover artist, I would have said, what?
I was going to ask you that about time at school.
Yeah.
Obviously you're above me at school.
Yeah.
And what's funny is when you're at a boarding school with boys, most of the career choices people are looking to I'm going to go to do finance, I'm going to go do property, I'm going to go and do law. And it's like, I remember going back to the first old boys reunion, and they're like, so what are you doing? And I was like, I do bespoke wallpaper. And they're like, what? Why are you a lawyer? Why? They're like, because I'm not a sheep. I'm not following that kind of path. And it's like, when you're in the bubble, you don't necessarily kind of see that how unusual it is and how many options there are to do it.
I think I think it's a shame. It's quite sad sometimes when some people are destined for insurance. Okay, sure, that's fine. Weird, but okay. But I think it's a shame when a child or someone young hasn't been given the options and the freedom to find what they want to do. Maybe they will go back to insurance and find it naturally, but I think a lot of people don't question it and think there are other options.
How important do you think kind of the creative arts and creative thinking is in kind of the education process and the emphasis of doing it? Because you did a lot of drama at school, didn't you?
Yeah.
And how much do you think that's giving you confidence in, I mean, it's going to be huge confidence in this area, I imagine, but just in life in general? I
mean, I think that's drama has been a big shaper for where I am and who I am. I did it at prep school as well, and I think the teachers as well encouraging you to do it. So I've always enjoyed drama and being in plays, I used to get unbelievably nervous. Like especially like a school play when you're in front of like 600 people. Well, you just start thinking, well, if I fluff my lines up, everyone's going to laugh at me. It's daunting, and without teachers and parents to encourage you and be like, go on, you're good at this. Go on, go and do that. That's incredibly important. I actually think that Mr. May, do you remember?
Yeah. Retired this year.
Yeah, he's a great man. I think he's been quite a big influence. He's just a great drama teacher. Also put up with some quite irritating 14-year-olds. So yeah,
What do you reckon were the biggest lessons he were that kind of like shaped you?
Patience. Because I look back and I think I was a little shit. And yeah, I think it's literally pushing me onto this stage. Like, I think that's an unbelievably valuable experience. Like, it gives you confidence, and like the confidence to speak in front of people and perform is good, not only if you're doing something in the performing arts like voiceover, but in everyday life. Just talking to people in meetings or whatever.
How to present ideas.
How to present ideas persuasively. Yeah.
I had that with architecture. Like, that was like public speaking I hated, and like last year I was head of social, and I had to do the Bible readings and going down in chapel and doing that. I had huge anxiety.
I wouldn't. I'm glad I didn't.
I used to skip out paragraphs. I do the first paragraph and the last paragraph, and no one ever noticed because I wanted to be there as least time as possible. But then doing architecture, we were forced to really think through our ideas, and you had to present them to your group, your kind of unit, once a week, and then to your tutor once a week, and have they're called crits, and get constructive criticism from them of why you're doing it, and then learning how to actually take the criticism and use it to grow. And for me, that was such a foundation of confidence to be able to stand there, have eyes on you, and say, "This is what I'm thinking. I'm putting my heart on the line, my brain on the line." For you to destroy it, and let's see how I can recover, kind of thing, and how I can get up and go again. And I think it's so important to do that because it's too easy to be brittle and just to snap. And that's why I asked you early on about the hurdles. It's too easy for people to have a problem early on and go, "Oh, I'm not going to
give up.
I'm not doing this anymore."
You need to do the uncomfortable things to be good and to succeed. I think. Yeah.
How do you define like success in the voice artist kind of space, in the voiceover space?
If the client says, "I love this. This is the best thing I've ever heard," that feels good.
Okay.
I think that's really why I do it. It's not really for money. Obviously, I need food and water.
Yeah.
And I like to buy expensive packets of crisps. But it's the satisfaction of making someone feel something. Ultimately, it's so rewarding when someone's like, "Oh, that was really funny," or like, "Yeah, that was quite sad. That was really in a good way." If it's a sad subject,
of course,
that's really what I define as success. That's why I do it, because it's a sense of like fulfillment and feeling productive and feeling like I've made my own mark. Like hearing something out there or seeing an advert and thinking that I did that. That sounds very self-centered, but I like leaving my mark and having something that I've created. I don't necessarily want to be a cog in a machine. I want to be able to say that was me.
It's connection really as well, I guess, to people that you're giving like an emotional.
You are in. You've got a lot of power and control because you are playing with someone's emotion, or you're selling them something that they definitely don't need. But yeah, it's. I just can't. It was the same at school, like doing plays. It was just an unbelievably good experience. I played the bagpipes as well.
Yeah,
that's quite good because that always makes an impression.
Yeah,
and the reaction you get is great. And I still get I get nervous about voiceover. I get nervous about playing the bagpipes because I only ever play them at weddings now. I just get wheeled out whenever there's a wedding. I'm retired now, just FYI. But like that's a nerve-wracking experience, especially when you're doing it for someone who's not family. You're like, this is their big day. I cannot screw this up. But then the reward afterwards is just far outweighs any nerves you had before. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of these things you're talking about, you're really putting yourself in the limelight to be that one to be judged.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because I avoided the limelight. Like I really tried to until I was exposed with kind of architecture to really have confidence, and it's really interesting in terms of it would be interesting to understand, what was the driver for that for you? Why were you putting yourself in that position younger on, which is again now going into this career?
I don't know. Like it's kind of, you know what? I'd love to know because at some point, I don't know if it started at school when I was like 7 or 8. Annoyingly, my memory's not very good before that.
Yeah, of course.
So I don't know if I was like prancing around in the house doing like little shows or something like that. But I'm pretty sure I've always had I think maybe there's a bit of nature in there. I think there's always been something inside of me in my DNA that's made me want to be the center of attention.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think it's just, and then I just think it's been nurtured probably from my parents and school.
What position are you in terms of with your siblings? Are you like middle?
I'm the youngest.
The youngest, okay,
which
the
probably
youngest explains it.
It probably explains quite a bit. Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. I reckon also because my brother, we sound exactly the same.
Really?
Yeah, it's very weird. But he always went to like the school that I then went to.
Yeah.
So I was always like, and I always like idolized him. I just sit and watch him play like computer games because I just enjoyed just watching him. I was like, Frederick's so great. But I think after a while, like when you become older and a bit more aware, and you become an adult, I definitely think my position in the rankings probably has had an influence. I think it's not as overt. I think it's been more subtle, but I've probably made some subconscious decisions that I want to be different maybe and buck the trend a bit. So that's probably shaped what I do a bit.
So is he your brother? Sorry, a lot older than you? What's the age gap?
So there's been about a 5-year gap. So whenever I went to school, he would have just left. Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so how important was your relationship with him when you're younger?
Very important. I probably get quite a bit of my my sense of humour. I think probably from him.
Okay.
It's probably all from him. To be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when we're together, it's baffling. Sometimes we just say the same thing,
really?
Exactly the same voice, and it's like, oh God, I want to be my own man. Yeah. But yeah, I think the family dynamic has been very important. I think we've got a very good dynamic. I mean, 4 siblings that all get on very well is great, and I think slightly rare as well, especially as you grow older, people drift apart. But we all get on very well. We're all quite different, but we get on, and it's nice. Almost that a little bit of friction and sort of bouncing off like different people's personalities has been like quite an important factor in shaping my personality, probably all of our personalities. And then my parents as well, and the life that we've lived like abroad has been great. So yeah, a good family dynamic I think has shaped me.
It's interesting. I ask always people about kind of growing up in isolation and loneliness, because a lot of people who maybe are a bit more eccentric or a little bit more out there and creative, and they're following those paths, do have a lot of isolation and feel a lot of loneliness because they don't feel like they're fitting into that kind of group. Like, did you ever kind of have that, if it maybe at school or probably not in family, it doesn't seem like, but in those positions where you're like,
what was I a loser?
No, no, but not that. But I remember, like my dad always used to tell me that when I was like at my prep school, he always could see that I was the person trying to make people laugh because I didn't fit on the level with people intellectually, like getting like trying to be like the cool kids. So I would be the court jester, and so and I look back at it and I think there was some serious levels of isolation because I never really connected with people properly on the level I was on.
Yeah, this is beginning to feel like a
Therapy
therapy session.
session. I know.
You're making me realize things, and it's freaking me out. That resonates with me actually. Now you highlight it. I think I use, like you, comedy is almost like a social tool, and perhaps once you get good at it, you start relying on it, and it's your way of like getting into like a social situation or a friendship group. But I think I've had moments of isolation. I think, you know, being a child and a teenager, it's very up and down. Like 1 month or whatever, you may be in the cool gang, whatever the hell that is, or the gang that's perceived to be cool but isn't actually. And then the next month, you know, you might be having a shit time. I think that's just the nature of being a child and growing up, and boarding school as well. I think can be like a sort of concentrated version of that. I think all of those elements can be way more severe when you're in a walled off place in complete isolation, especially when, I mean, for me, my parents were in Saudi Arabia or wherever. It did at points I did feel quite isolated. So yeah, I mean, maybe I think, yeah, pockets of isolation. What is the logic that being isolated drives you to?
In some ways, yeah. I think it depends, but a lot of the kind of most successful people out there have had moments of isolation because they've just thought in a completely different way, and they've come to a problem in a different way, and they've made something in a different way, they've reacted to something in a different way.
Yeah.
And so it sparks almost a little bit of a genius reaction, or, you know, creative reaction in that sense. And then also there's a driver to it as well, as like you're trying harder to impress, to try and create something. You've got there's a thing I always bring up, and people get bored of me saying it, but Jordan Peterson talked about this experiment they did with a rat. Right. They put a spring on the tail of the rat, okay, and they starved it, and they put food in front of it, and they measured the tension in the spring the rat had to pull towards the food. Then they put the scent of a cat behind it and measured the tension to discover what the driving factors, what it was trying to, running away from something or running towards something.
Yeah.
And I find isolation sometimes can create that as well. Like you can either be isolated and really dwell on things you haven't got and how you don't fit in, so you try and become that person you don't want to be, and that drives you further. There's like it's a really hard balance.
Right.
I've asked a few people and they go, oh, it's probably a bit of both, but it's a really interesting concept and kind of thing to understand, because I think people doing this kind of entrepreneurial route, there is that balance, but there's that moment where they are thinking so differently to be able to have the courage to do that.
Yeah, from what my mother tells me, I've always had a different way of thinking, or learning things as well. There was a time when I was younger. We lived in Germany at the time. I think they were a bit worried about me because I was struggling to learn how to tell the time. I remember I used to freak out when people would ask me when I was wearing a watch and people say, "Oh, what's the time?" I would freak out because I can't read it. So I'd stumble and I'd like pretend that I haven't heard that they asked the question, so it could give me time to figure out what the hell this watch thing was telling me. And I think my parents were worried. I think they thought that I had the IQ of a toaster or something. But I then had like sort of tutoring.
How to read a watch tutoring.
Special tutoring for a special person. And the person apparently said he's okay. He just has a very different way of thinking. And I think I'm sure my friends and family would probably describe me as a relatively stubborn person, and I think that plays a factor too. If I'm told something, I might be like, nah, I'm going to do it my own way. Thank you very much. So,
do you think that helps you in this kind of career path, that stubbornness to go? You've got obviously the self-confidence to know what you think would be right, rather than being kind of forced into scenarios other people want.
I think stubbornness is very important. And I think when I look at other people who've had sort of successful entrepreneurial ventures, I think there's a common thread from what I can see. There is a bit of stubbornness, and I think that's the thing that gets you through when when you get shit feedback or you're not getting any work and you start doubting yourself, or imposter syndrome is like a massive hurdle that most people have to deal with.
Have you had to deal with that?
Yeah, all the time.
Can you give some examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, a smaller example recently. So for my day job, we went to Georgia to shoot an advert. Georgia as in next to Russia, not in America.
Yeah.
And because I was away in Georgia, I couldn't do voiceover. So you shut down you make everyone aware that you're unavailable. So suddenly, like your like auditions and requests plummet, obviously. And one of the places I actually get a lot of work from is a website called Fiverr.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which is controversial.
Why?
Well, a lot of voiceover artists don't like it because people on that site undercut like the prices, so it just brings the price floor down. But I don't do that. I set my prices like normal levels on there. It's just turned out to be a very good site because a lot of people go on there. So a lot of my work recently has come through there. So when I set it as I'm away, all my impressions and stuff, they die down. And there's like a thing to do with the algorithm where you're just not coming up highly on searches even when you turn it back on. So when I came back and I turned it back on, having had like quite a big flurry of work about 4 weeks ago, then I had like nothing for a week because it takes a bit of time to pick up. And I didn't really realize that until recently. And in a moment like that, you start thinking, I just got lucky with those jobs that just came through. Like, maybe I'm not very good at this. Damn it. What am I not doing right? Or you send demos to people, and a lot of the time people just don't reply. It is incredibly frustrating. I think it's frankly, it's bloody rude. I think it's not difficult to just write an email and say, thanks very much. I'm sharing this with the client. We'll come back to you in a couple of days. Or thanks for trying. It's not quite right, but we'll keep you posted. So yeah, when that happens a lot, and you send off, people can be so like frantic. They're like, hey Toby, we've got this advert we're making and the deadline's in like a week. Will you be able to like do this? And do you have availability this week? And I'm like, yeah. I'll do your demo now. And then they just don't reply. You're like, well, screw you. And when that happens, the unknown is the difficult part, because then you just start thinking, what was it that was wrong? And your mind goes to bad places because you're sort of wired to think about the worst thing.
Of course. And
so you then pick up, you make it up. You're like, oh, well, I said that line like this. So yeah, that was probably not very good, was it? And it's probably nothing to do with that.
Are you very self-critical of your own work as well?
Yeah. Maybe too much so. And that's something that I'm learning to kind of, rein in a bit. Because,
how do you learn that?
Well, they say when you audition, what you should do is you should just do like 3 or even 1. You send the audition, that's it. Because really what they're listening to on the audition is your voice right? And then they can fine tune the performance things. But I used to just do it where I do like endless takes. And then you just get lost in it because you're listening back to like 15 takes and you're struggling to figure out what the difference is. And then you start doing things like, you take out a word, you're like, oh, I said that word quite well, and you take that out and you put that in another read, and then it sounds weird and it's all disjointed, and it's not accurate because you won't necessarily be able to replicate that again. So yeah, I try now to just be a bit more like conservative with it and just do like 1 or 2. Because it also means that the more time you're spending on one audition means you're not doing other auditions, or you're not doing a job that you've actually got and you're getting paid for. So you have to try not to be as critical. It's a difficult balance, because obviously the quality of your product comes from the fact that you are being self-critical. But often there's things that you're picking up on and getting annoyed at that other people, the person hearing it, won't. For example, we were speaking before this about mouth clicks.
Yeah.
And that, I think it's one of the most annoying things when you hear it. I really notice it, and I'm like, oh, that's so rank. And some people it's worse than others. It's all about hydration, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
What, if you're not hydrated enough?
You have to. It's a fine balance. So you have to. you can't be overhydrated because there's too much water in your mouth. But they say you should be, if you've got a big session tomorrow, you should be keeping hydrated basically from the day before. So it's just like consistently having water. And when you're in the recording as well, it's like sipping between takes to like lubricate the mouth. And I tried everything. I tried olive oil in your mouth. So rank, like sort of engine oil. I mean, it was bizarre. It didn't really work. It's just disgusting. But that's a thing that a lot of people struggle with, and they try and figure out what the solution is. The solution is water. And mic position. So water and mic position. So your mic should be off axis. So like pointing at your mouth there. If it's there, you're going to get all the plosives and the clicks, and it's literally pointing right into your throat. So you
at the side, basically like that.
Yeah, like that. Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, so back to the critical nature of my reviews, my self-reviews, I try and clean out every click, which is unnecessary and ridiculous. So doing like a space documentary, which is an hour long, going through and taking out these little clicks is just stupid. But I kind of almost become obsessed about it. I enjoy editing and that sort of post-production engineering, sound engineering part of it. But at work, when I listen to radio ads that we've had recorded for clients, there's loads of clicks on them and no one picks up on it. What's interesting is people don't pick up on it. So like I'll send it round to the creatives or something. I'll be like, what do you think of that? And they're like, yep, great. And I'm like, it's disgusting. It's like they've got like mashed potatoes in their mouth. I can't get over it. It's so rank. But people don't necessarily pick up on that thing. And also, that's natural. You have mouth clicks naturally. Yeah. So those sometimes an element of those imperfections in a voiceover recording is not a problem. So yeah, it's difficult being. I think you should obsess over things, but not too much, because then you become inefficient and you're wasting time on not getting other jobs.
No, that's very fair. And I think it's very interesting in terms of like, it's like an obsessive compulsive kind of reaction sometimes, and you get into it and you're like, it just needs to be perfect.
It needs to be absolutely spot on.
And you can spend like 8 hours doing something which really doesn't need it. And and I think that's also one of the, like, for example, doing a podcast or like a YouTube channel or something. Before you put anything out, you're like, I'm going to do a few, I'm going to make sure they're perfect before the first one goes out. And then the more you do, you go, I'm just going to edit this less.
Yeah, I'm just going to, this is fine.
Yeah. They're just like, it doesn't need that. Like it's more about kind of like the bigger picture, like people's awareness to it.
People are not going to, and also when when I'm like editing, I'm listening to it on very good earphones, through very good software, and I've got it loud so I can hear everything. What I always do when I finalize and mix a voiceover, I then play it on my phone, and you do this.
I do exactly the same.
And all of a sudden you're like, oh, that actually sounds quite good. Yeah. And I can't hear any of the things that, all of the imperfections that I was listening to through my headphones.
It's like too much information is not useful.
No, exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get overwhelmed by it. Yeah, don't sweat the small stuff. Sweat the big stuff. That's the opposite to what the actual phrase is.
Yeah. So how do you kind of find your fulfillment in life with this? Like, how do you kind of find that balance, I guess, and make sure it is still a fun thing which you're going to do for life?
That is a very good question. I think a variety of projects is important within voiceover. So I think, let's say hypothetically, I was doing it full time. I'd need a balance of, doing commercials and what I like the more. I'll describe them as the more creative scripts. Mm-hmm. So one of my best adverts that I did was a TV ad, and the brief was quite fun because it was, you are the internal monologue of this guy who's just come out of lockdown. He's at his first party. And he's sketching out a bit, and basically there's a guy pulling some cool dance moves, and the guy who you're the internal monologue for is thinking, how am I going to be as cool as that? So that's a really fun brief, because it's quite specific, but it's still open enough that you can then interpret it yourself. So doing something like that is very enjoyable. Doing the corporate explainer thing is a bit more dry.
Yeah.
I did a health and safety video for a big car brand, who I shall not name, and that was pretty dry. So if I was doing that the whole time, I think I'd probably go insane. So you need a variety of things. I think you also need leisure time. You need time to go on a holiday and not think about it, or be with your mates.
Can you achieve it though? Can you go away and not think about voiceover?
No. No. It's difficult as well because you kind of have to be available. You have to be like, if someone, you might miss out on a massive job. But again, it's the difficult thing, because you might miss out on a job, but in the grand scheme of things, there's probably another job coming down the line. Like, it doesn't really matter. I think, well, I don't think you can really switch off anyway unless you go on like quite a long holiday. Which is probably unrealistic.
What are you thinking about when you're away then about voiceover?
I'll be looking at I'll be keeping an eye on the auditions that go up. So some of the websites I'm on, there are two which are called pay-to-play sites, where you pay a subscription to be on that site. They vet you, and then clients put up auditions. So they'll put a sample script and say, this is for this, send your voiceovers. So that'll be something that I'll be looking at, which I probably shouldn't, because when you're away and you don't have a microphone, and sometimes you'll see something and you'll be like, that is literally, I could nail that. I could absolutely nail that. So really, I probably shouldn't be looking at that. I should properly switch off.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing I'll be looking at, and what kind of impressions I'm getting on like Fiverr, for example, because you can see they've got quite good like metrics where you can see how many impressions you're getting, how many click-throughs. Which is not good. It's a bit like when you've invested some stocks and you just look at it every day.
Yeah.
The changes are pretty minimal and they're not going to make much difference. You should just sort of leave it alone for a bit. But yeah, those are and I'll be looking to see if any of the work that I've done recently is actually live.
Okay.
Because sometimes it doesn't go live, or it does without your voice, and you're like, what? Like, okay,
they cut me out.
Yeah,
it's like Jack Whitehall in what is it? What's that princess movie about the snow? What's the one which turned into a play? And it's like the snowman and like the ice. Frozen. he was in Frozen.
He was in Frozen.
Yeah, and then he got cut out. He was one of the like snowmen, like
that's gutting, isn't it?
And he had like one line, and he was so afraid. Got the whole family. I went to the cinema, and his line was taken out.
Oh my god, that is gutting. You know, on that, Vin Diesel got paid about £15 million to say it.
Is it in Guardians of the Galaxy?
Yeah. I think it was just for the whole thing. It's like, I am Groot. He probably just went to the studio for like 2 hours or something.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Nice.
Actually, who are your role models in kind of the space?
Well, I don't know a lot of voiceovers, like personally.
Yeah.
You see people like all over LinkedIn like a bad rash, and then Instagram as well, but you don't know them. There is one guy that I do know, a guy called Joseph Bader, who's a very good voiceover artist, and who coincidentally is now going out with my brother's wife's sister. So really weird.
In the family.
Yeah. And he was on holiday recently, so we were talking about voiceover. It's not often that you get to like hang out, so we were pretty excited about it, talking about really boring stuff about audio processing, whilst the rest of the table were extremely bored. But we were just like, oh my god, that's crazy! What equipment do you use? Awesome. But he's been quite important actually, because in the early days when I decided when I was thinking about it, so. After seeing Simon Greenall do his Meerkat voices, a long time passed before I actually did anything about it. And I think part of the reason I ended up doing something was because I was talking about it so much that I was annoying myself by not having anything to show for it. So it gets to a point where you're kind of, you're almost lying to people. So are you actually going to do anything about it? And then a friend from school, John Tarsty, said to me, oh, I know a guy who does voiceover. It's his main job. I'll put you in touch. So I was like, oh, great. So I emailed Joe, and it's that classic thing you do when, a little bit like when you're looking for a work experience or something. You're like, hi, I heard you're doing this. I'd love to go for a coffee and talk about it. It's basically very non-committal. Because I was slightly apprehensive about it, because I think you're nervous about like putting yourself on the line a bit, and you're like, I'm really going to sort of make myself vulnerable here. And he emailed back and he said, mate, screw the coffee, come to mine. We'll record your voice reels, and then we can let's get this show on the road. And I was like, great. And I kind of needed that, a little bit of a shove. So I went to his and sat in his booth and recorded my reel. So I basically picked, a little bit like when I was practicing, I picked some adverts off the radio that I liked, and then we recorded them. And it was great because up until then I'd been practicing with Wallen, and which is great, but he's not a voiceover artist or a voice coach.
Yeah.
And then aside from that, I'm literally just doing it alone in my room, it's just a bizarre concept. Me sitting in my booth, talking at a microphone as if I'm talking to someone else. I'm completely alone, and you can't effectively criticize yourself. You can't have a conversation with yourself unless you are a psychopath. So when when you record something, you're like, that was all right. Maybe I could try it like that. You can only get so far with that. So having someone else, having this guy Joe, to say, why don't you try it like this or try that, and like telling me stuff that I had no idea about. He told me about. So he used to be an actor, and then he went into voiceover because he just loves it. And he was talking about how, I think there's some Shakespearean thing. I might be making complete crap up, but anyway, it's a thing where you emphasize the words like you and he. What are those words called?
I have no idea. I stopped doing English at GCSE.
First, whatever. Anyway, those
First
words.
person,
Yeah, something. I'm sure we'll find out.
Yeah, someone
follow up with an email.
Yeah, please leave a comment.
But that was quite interesting. So to bring in one of the tools you can use is you emphasize the yous, and if you were talking about a person, you emphasize the name. It just helps bring it to life a bit. So that was great. And also, most importantly, let's be honest, we all do what we do for a bit of validation. We want people to say, "Good job, Toby," and say you're okay at this. And that was quite important, because I didn't know if I was any good up until then. And he was like, mate, this is really good stuff. Like, I think you've got something here. Like, you should definitely. He was just so encouraging. So that was probably a little bit of a catalyst in my career. So yeah, he's probably like the only voiceover role model. But I mean, there have been other people who probably influenced my thinking. I remember there was a guy when I was looking for a job in advertising. I spoke to a guy who Roger Ogilvy, I think he is. So he was a relation of David Ogilvy. Do you know David? Have you heard of the advertising agency Ogilvy?
No.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah, shut up about advertising, Toby. It's a very famous advertising agency, and the guy who started it, David Ogilvy, from 1960s or 70s, I think he's considered like the godfather of advertising or something like that. Anyway, so this guy, Roger Ogilvy, was some sort of relation of him, so it was pretty cool to be able to speak to him. I remember one of the things he said, which stays with me to this day, was you need to pick 3 people in your life and listen to them. You can't listen to everyone. And I thought that was just so valid, because at that time, I was getting a lot of different opinions. That like period of time when you're looking for a job is pretty soul destroying. When you have no skills, you're going in at entry level, and you're just getting rejected left, right, and centre from interviews and grad schemes. And sometimes the easy way is to go and do what Daddy did, which is a shame. So yeah, him saying that was very useful, because then you can choose your own narrative to a degree. Like, I think it's not to say that you should just completely ignore what people are saying and just like choose something unrealistic. Like, if you're about to make a bad decision, don't get people who are going to back it up. But yeah, it was good because there were people who were saying, mate, maybe you should give up on the advertising dream. Like at this point, I think I'd not got through to like 4 or 5 grad schemes, and I was like, oh man, this really sucks. But then I was like, I'm going to listen to the sort of the positive people and not the naysayers. And the same goes with voiceover. You got to pick. You got to like tune out the naysayers, because there's just so many people who are saying, no, you can't, you shouldn't do that. No, you really need to train. You need to do 3 years of training, which is complete crap. And then, I mean, I didn't really know. I mean, other people have influenced it.
Yeah.
But I think those have been 2 key people.
Yeah, that's interesting, because also while you were saying it, I was thinking a lot about the saying, like, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with,
right?
And how they influence you, and selecting your 3 people to listen to is similar kind of lines to that.
Yeah.
Choose who can influence who you're going to be, and how you're going to live, which is super interesting.
Yeah, surround yourself with good people, I suppose.
Yeah. Are you a long-term or short-term thinker?
I think I am a short-term thinker, because I fail to grasp the urgency of things until the deadline is fast approaching.
Okay.
And that, I mean, that's always been a theme, whether it's university or work. Sometimes I wish I was a bit more of a long-term thinker and thinking about future Toby, but...
Do you not have a vision of what you could be? Like, Toby, the ultra-successful voiceover artist who you go and you can see him and you're, like, working towards that?
No, I don't think I do, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, I am... No, and now I'm picturing it. It's weird.
What are you picturing?
I'm picturing, like...
In
weird,
a box.
Like, yeah.
In a booth, he's still there.
In his room. Yeah, I don't think I do. I try not to think too much. I mean, actually, I don't try not to. I just don't. But also, I sort of bat away too many future thoughts, because I think what's about to happen. I mean, you have no idea what's about to happen. Mm-hmm. I think there was some research done, and I don't know how the hell they did this, where it's like 99% of the things you worry about never happen, which is just so true. Like, what? I mean, it never pans out like you think it will. So what? Don't waste time thinking about the future. Same with the past. Like, you've already done it. I mean, sure, you shudder about like a really embarrassing moment when you were like 14. Every now and again, you're like, oh man, why did I do that? But like, you can't change the past. That's an obvious statement. But like, yeah, just focus on what you're doing at the moment, I think, is the important thing.
What do you think, like, the most important lesson your parents taught you was in terms of, like, being as a person?
Don't eat with your mouth open.
That's a great one, actually.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
But now
on
that
dates.
really annoys me when people eat with their mouth open. I'm like, shut up, please.
Yeah.
I think the independence, and I think they've sort of encouraged me and my siblings to be slightly, not critical, but like inquisitive about things. And you don't, like going back to how we were saying, you go to an institution, then you go to another one, then you get married. Like, these sort of like guardrails. Like, I think they've definitely instilled a sense of, like, you don't have to necessarily do that. You can question the world in which you grow up in. They've never been, as some parents can be. They impose their views, and maybe they have a vision for you that they think is nice. They've never been like that, which is nice. I think, like, when I said to my dad, I'm not joining the army, he was like, what? But then, he's very happy about it. So I think they've been very like open-minded and encouraged us to sort of find our own way in life, which is incredibly valuable, I think.
Awesome. Okay, final 2 questions. So first one is, what do you think the keys are to succeeding in following your passion and actually making it a reality in your life?
It's a big question.
It's a big one.
That's huge. I think you have to make peace with the fact you are going to have to eat shit. That is important. It's a mindset thing. I think some people feel like they're owed something, or they deserve greatness just for existing. And the reality is, you don't. The world doesn't care about you. So you need to forge your own path in life. Like it's all up to you. It's off your own back that you need to do stuff. So yeah, don't expect things. Do it yourself. And perseverance, I think. And again, that is probably like a really annoying thing to say, because it's just like a classic trope or cliche. But the reason it is because it's true. Like, coming from me, someone who's so impatient, like I've seen the effects of persevering, and with some of the things I do in life, I give up. I read a book, sometimes I read a couple of pages, and I'm like, I can't be asked with the rest of it. And I think that's like symptomatic sometimes of like my wider outlook on life. And there have been moments in voiceover where there was a definite period where I think about a year in, and I was, for some reason, I think I fell out of love with it. It may be because I went in too hard and I just did so much, and I think I just oversaturated myself with voiceover, and I just got a bit sick of it, like eating too much food, which is a shame. And I wasn't getting jobs through, and it's just a bit of a down period. But you just have to persevere, and don't listen to the naysayers unless they're right. Unless you are really shit at what you do.
Does it matter though?
If you're shit at what you do,
as long as you love it.
No, it's not. As long as you're happy, it doesn't matter.
Just curveball like that. Just
yeah. Do whatever makes you happy.
Yeah.
Just don't do voiceovers that I'm going to have to listen to if you're shit. Please.
Noted.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. What's the one lesson you would want to teach your kids when you have them?
Don't eat with your mouth open.
Pass it down the family.
It would be being inquisitive, because I think, like my own experience, I would hate for them to expect certain things and think there are certain milestones in life, that you have to get married at a certain age and you have to have children at a certain age, because if you don't and your mate's doing it, you're a weirdo. I think if you equip them with the tools to be inquisitive, then they're gonna be happy, because they're gonna do what they want to do in life and not what other people are doing. And they're also not going to care too much about other people's views and societal pressures, and just be independent. Yeah, I'd hate to like sort of force my children, like be like, you must do this. But I wouldn't want them to be like lunatics, just sort of with dreadlocks running around and playing in the mud. But I want to give them enough freedom of thought, I think.
What's the importance of that?
What's important?
Of the freedom in terms of...
happiness, I think. If you're always doing what you think is expected of you, you're probably not going to be happy, because someone else is setting those objectives and those goals. You just need to do what you actually want to do, and you need to find that out for yourself. And you're the only one who can find it out. I mean, I might be able to impose my wisdom and say that you'll be a great lawyer, Jimmy. I'm not going to call my son Jimmy. And it's a delicate position, because children are so malleable, and he might be like, well, my dad thinks that, so yeah, I will be. And then he might do it, and he'll be like, I hate this. So yeah, I think freedom is incredibly important. Freedom of thought, and don't eat with your mouth open.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Toby.
Well, thank you.
Honestly, it's a really interesting conversation, talking to someone. It's a very niche world, voiceover. So really interesting understanding your process, your way of thinking, and kind of like the whole mindset around it. And again, as I said, that stage of going into it potentially being a full-time thing for you, I think, be interesting and valuable for people to hear that. So I really appreciate that. And thank you for coming on the Valley of Outlaws.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Valley of Outlaws podcast. If you did enjoy it, please share, like and subscribe, and please tell all your friends about it. We are very excited for where this is going to go. We've got people to speak to and stories to tell. Thank you.